If you like what you see on this video, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button and comment down below. By commenting down below, it helps YouTube know that this video is interesting and will find the way to other loom knitters that may not know about this technique or that may have wondered about the technique but couldn't find any information on it. Like I said, please consider commenting and liking this video. It helps get us in the world of YouTube. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Erica and I am the Lopsided Crafter. You can find me on all the socials as either the Lopsided Crafter or Lopsided Crafter. We also have our own website, thelopsidedcrafter.com. Welcome to part 1 of our 3-part series on color work on the loom. We will be going over in the first video Intarsia knitting on the loom. Part 2 will be about Fair Isle knitting on the loom, and part 3 will be a conclusion of both of them together, Intarsia versus Fair Isle. This is Intarsia knitting on the loom. Whenever you have a big block of color, that is considered Intarsia, because you will have to have multiple bobbins that have each color on that corresponding bobbin. Typically, Intarsia is for projects with lots of color. Say there's a design of a large bird or a cat or something like that. That's when you would use Intarsia, because there are too many colors within, too many stitches within that one area to float your yarn on the back. So when you float your yarn on the back, that's where Fair Isle comes into place. So again, Intarsia is when you have one huge or more blocks of color within a certain area. So this little swatch, I made a graph and I will pop it up right here, was just a simple 10 by 10 graph, and I did add a border on the top, bottom, and a small one on the side so that it would not curl while I was working on the project, and it would lay a little bit flatter as I'm showing you about Intarsia. As you can see, it is nice and crisp here on the sides, and it's nice and neat on the back. Now, once we go over to the craft table and I show you how to do these, you will see the bobbins, you will see the chaos with the bobbins, and this is just with 3. That is one of the cons of Intarsia knitting, is bobbins. Some people say you need to be an experienced knitter and or loom knitter to deal with all the bobbins. I don't necessarily believe that. An experienced knitter could also have issues, and or a beginning knitter, loom knitter, may handle it with ease. So that is just completely up to your preference and your style of knitting. So by saying that Intarsia knitting is, loom knitting is more advanced because of the bobbins, I do not agree with. It's a little bit more advanced in the color change aspect, but not handling the bobbins itself. So that is one of the cons of Intarsia knitting. A second con to Intarsia knitting is it's not very friendly for small blocks of color. So say this was broken up and it was, instead of a block of pink here, it was pink, white, pink, white, pink, white, pink. That is not friendly for Intarsia, because of the bobbins. So then you say, okay, Erica, well, why don't you just connect one bobbin and just go from your pink to white, pink to white to pink to white with one bobbin for the pink and one bobbin for the white? Well, because if you are going to connect one bobbin for each color and work across using those two bobbins, one for each color, then that is where Fair Isle knitting comes in, because you have floats on the back. So, different technique. We will go over that in part 2. So that is why single stitches of color is not very favorable in Intarsia knitting, because technically you would have to have one bobbin for each of those colors. I don't know who would really want to do that. I wouldn't. Another con for Intarsia knitting is a little bit harder to do in the round. It can be done, but it is a little bit harder to do in the round. More so if you are a needle knitter versus a loom knitter. We on the loom can get, do things a little bit differently, and it might not be so much of a con for loom knitting, but it is a con for needle knitting. And again, one of the major cons is the bobbins and weaving in all of the ends. Now, having said that, Intarsia knitting does have some pros. It is virtually possible to put any picture into your knitting with Intarsia knitting, because again, you have all these bobbins. You can create birds, you can create eagles. If there is a graph online on Etsy or something like that, and you want to purchase it, and you are willing to do all the bobbins for all the color changes, then you can do the Intarsia style of knitting on the loom, and that is a pro. The next pro is there are more than 3 colors per row. Typically on Fair Isle knitting, you only use up to 3 colors per row, which again, we will get into when we get over to the Fair Isle knitting. But one of the pros for the Intarsia is you can have, again, multiple colors per row. So if we had, say, this is white, and then we halved this square, we could do pink, blue, and white again. So we would have 1, 2, 3, 4 colors in this little section, and that is a pro. But again, you would have all those bobbins attached as well. Another pro for Intarsia knitting is the drape. The drape on Intarsia knitting is a little bit more relaxed than Fair Isle because of the floats. However, I have found when you are needle knitting in Fair Isle with your floats, you tend to go down a needle size because of the bunching. I have found on the loom that is not always the case, meaning I am not going to change my loom peg sizes, switching from one loom to another to do the design on Fair Isle. So I have not actually found with working on the loom that it makes a difference as far as the design part. But that is a pro to Intarsia, that your needle size and peg size is the same, and you don't have to worry about changing it for the color work area. Another pro to Intarsia is that it can be combined with any stitch, within any stitch. Say you're working on the loom and you are making this baby blanket and you want the border to be white and you want the pink in the middle to be a cable, you can create the cable stitches itself with the pink, and then your border around would be the white. That is also a form of intarsia. So if you've ever seen designs out there, I've seen them in crochet, not so much on the loom knitting side, but I have seen crochet where, again, you know, it's a blanket and the actual cable itself is a different color. That is a form of intarsia. So that is also a pro to intarsia. So now that we have discussed the pros and cons of intarsia, let's head on over to the looming table. I will go over the first couple rows of how to do the intarsia, how to add your new bobbins in, and how to change colors on subsequent rows. This is not necessarily a stitch tutorial, but a technique tutorial. So I hope you enjoy this first part of our 3-part color series on Intarsia and Fair Isle loom knitting. I'll see you at the loom knitting table. Hello and welcome to the loom knitting table. So while I talk to you, I am just going to go ahead and cast on a little bit. If you hear noise in the background, I'm sorry, it is extremely windy outside today. So I'm not sure if my camera is picking up on that or not. I am doing the chain cast on. This is not a stitch tutorial, but more of a technique instruction. So as I said in the main part of the video, we are going to be discussing the differences between Intarsia loom knitting and Fair Isle loom knitting, the pros and cons of both, why you would choose one or the other. So when you are doing Intarsia loom knitting, you would work with bobbins. And the reason you do this is because you have large chunks of color in a particular area where it is not feasible to carry the yarn behind the pegs like you would do in Fair Isle knitting. So if you're looking at a chart or you create a chart of your own and you have large blocks or chunks of color, like the graph that I will pop in right here, then that would indicate to you that you need to do Intarsia. Now, Intarsia is not a very popular form because of the bobbins. It can be, especially on larger projects, it can be difficult to control all your different bobbins, tangling up your yarn and things like that. So if you look at the graph, you can see on the bottom that we have 2 rows of our background color. And then when we move up to row 3, we will have 2 blocks of our background color. We will move into our block color, the square in the middle, and then we will have more of the background color on the side. So by looking at that graph, I can tell you that from row 3 to row 8, I'm going to need 3 bobbins. Because what you're wanting to look for is your different sets of colors within a row. So if, say for example, the middle pink square was divided in half and you had another row of white, then you would have to add an additional bobbin of white for that row, as well as an additional bobbin of pink for the blocks on the other side. I hope that makes sense. So that is one reason why, and probably the main reason why, Intarsia is not as popular. Another reason would be there are, depending on how many different colors you have within your chart, there are a lot of ends to weave in. And not a lot of people are fans, me included, of weaving in a lot of ends on a project. But one of the pros of Intarsia is you can make some very, very intricate, beautiful projects. You can use any stitch you like for Intarsia knitting on the loom. You can use the E-wrap, the U-knit, or the true knit stitch. But there is one thing I would like to mention as far as the knit stitch that you choose. If you are doing a border of any kind on your project while you are working on it, meaning bottom border and the sides, the knit stitch that you use for those borders need to be the same knit stitch that you choose for the actual chart. The reason is the E-wrap stitch is a little bit taller than your U-knit stitch and your true knit stitch. So if you were to use, say, the U-knit stitch on your borders and then the E-wrap in the middle on your chart, it would cause your project to roll in because of the size and shape of those knit stitches. So just keep that in mind when you're doing the chart. If it's rolling and you have some type of border on it, chances are it could be the knit stitch that you chose for the border. It could also be tension and some other things, but just make sure that you use the same knit stitch. Because I did my border in the same color as the chart main color, I do not have to add a new bobbin. I typically start my project off with the color of the background, if you will, the main color of the chart, with a bobbin already attached, so that way I don't have to add it later. Looking at the chart, I know for rows 1 and 2, I will have my main color. Now, if you look at rows 3 through 8, you see that we have a pink color. So I will need to add that in. Rows 3 through 8, I also have on the other side of that pink square another set of the background color. So I know just from looking at that chart that rows 3 through 8 will require the 3 bobbins. So I will go over a few of the rows with you. Again, this is not necessarily a stitch tutorial. It's more of a technique discussion. So I will not be working the whole graph, but enough of it for you to get an idea of what needs to be done. These first 2 stitches, one is my turn stitch and one is just one extra stitch that I'm using for as a background. So these 2 are not on the chart. I can see now from the chart that row 1 is 10 stitches of the background color. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. My 2 marked pegs. So I'm going to go ahead and E-wrap those side pegs here. This is my just extra peg, and this is my turning peg. So that was row 1. Row 2 is a duplicate of row 1. So let's do that, and then I will come back and show you how to add the new color. I will show you a few rows of that, actually the joining of the new color, and how to switch from color to color on the rows after. Okay, looking at the chart, we can see that we have 2 pegs that are going to be our background color. We have 6 that are going to be our contrast color and 2 that are going to be our background color. So I have already done my 2 side pegs here, my turning peg and my little border peg there. So I am going to E-wrap my first 2 pegs, and this is where we're going to add our new color. There are a couple different ways that you can do this. You can do a slip knot and put it on the first peg of the new color, or you can do it the way I do. I feel like it has a little bit more protection so that the yarn, the new color, does not come out. What I like to do is wrap the yarn around the old color, kind of like so. I will pull that all the way back, taut with the old color, and holding the old color kind of over here to the side and both strands of my new color, I am going to come around that peg and E-wrap it. And I will do the first 2, sometimes 3. And just knit those stitches off. Now what I like to do, let me grab this little strand here that split on me. Now what I like to do is come back here and look. If you can see, this yarn right here, the loop is just a little too big. So what I like to do is come back over here again, and now I will hold this old yarn and just pull these strands a little tighter. Take some of that slack out of there. Now what that does is it's pulled this yarn taut. And if it doesn't do it enough, then you go back and you do it again. You can usually find which one is your tail. Now, don't pull it too tight. Like, don't make it disappear, because then you will still have a little hole there. So if that happens, just pull that yarn tail back again a little bit, and it pulls that back out. Once you get to where you think you like it, you can just put your finger on that, grab that tool, and just tighten those other stitches back down. Just like so. Now I'm going to continue, and I'm going to drop that tail and do the other 3 stitches in that color. I'm going to set this off to the side. You can put it in the middle of your loom. You can set it off to the side, whichever works best for you. And now I'm going to grab another bobbin and add that background color back in. So you can probably already tell whether this is a method that you would like to do or not. Like I said, there are a lot of bobbins, a lot of ends to weave in and things of that nature. So there we have our first row of our actual graph. We have our 2 on the side of our main color, our 6 in the middle, which represents our pink square, and our 2 on this side. And then we just have our turning peg and our borders on either side. So now going up to row 4, it is the same exact row, except now we've got our colors already attached. So it's a little bit of a different technique. So let's knit over to our color change. Treating those loops, those pegs that have 2 loops on them for when you added your new color, treat both of those loops as 1 stitch. With the color that you just finished, going in the direction you are knitting, put it on top of the color you are picking up. So we are finished with the white. So you see that it's crossing the top, and we're going to pick up the pink. So just lay that off to the side. Pick up your pink and E-wrap. Knit your stitches. I'll do a few here so I can show you what happens when you do it that way. So by putting it on the top, that white color is now locked in with this pink strand right here. So it's not going to go anywhere, and it's going to create a nice join all the way up the project. I'll show you that again when we get on the other side. And just with 3 bobbins, I've already got things going crazy here. Okay, so we are back over here to our previous color. That is still a little too loose for me, but something else that you can do is when you're first joining the yarn, you do have this tail still. So if you need to slip stitch and when you're weaving in your tail to make that a little tighter, that is something you can do to rectify that loop. Okay, so we're back here to our new color change, and I need to bring in that yarn, and you see all that mess there. This is why, again, Intarsia is not my favorite. And of course, you know, it would be a little easier if I wasn't filming. I would have a little bit more control of the yarn and where I put it. But I want to make sure that you guys can see what's going on. So I'm just going to wrap this around this and put it back through this clothespin here. So old yarn over the top of the new yarn and E-wrap, or whichever knit stitch, purl stitch, whatever is the next stitch in your pattern. And there you go. Looks neat in the back. The stitch is locked in here and here. On to row 5, which is the same exact thing. I will go over with you again one more time how to lock that new color in. And then we will move on to the next part of the video. And I think that's split right there. A good way to tell if your yarn split is if you can't, I'm going to take this stitch back off here. I want to show you a little bit, a trick here. A way you can tell if your yarn split or not. If when you go to pull, it's tight, you see how that's tight and that loop's not coming out from your working yarn, that means that your yarn split. And I can see it right. I can see that split right here. So I'm just going to hold this loop and bring that split back over the top, and now my loop comes out. That's a good way to tell if you have split your yarn. If that loop does not come out freely, then your yarn has been split. Okay, I'm going to go over this again with you, leaving the camera zoomed in a little bit more this time. Again, you want your old color to go into the direction you are knitting over the new color. So old color over the new color. New color comes up from behind and continue your stitch pattern, which for me is the E-knit, the E-wrap knit. Another new color, our pink, which is our old, goes on top of the white, which is our new. Bring the white forward and E-wrap. And that locks that stitch in place. And that, my friends, is how you do Intarsia knitting. Let's head back to the main table and I will show you what it looks like after it's done. When you have finished the last row that involves your different color changes, you can go ahead and clip that yarn, leaving yourself a long tail for weaving in any holes that you may get once the background color is continued. So from here, you just would continue with the one bobbin and working across like the graph says for 2 more rows of the regular E-wrap knit stitch. Okay, now that I am done with this little square here for the Intarsia knitting on the loom, I wanted to take a moment to share with you what the back looks like and what the front looks like before all of the ends are woven in. So as you can see here on the front, we have these nice crisp edges here where we joined in our new yarn. Let me zoom in a little bit here so you can see that. We have nice, crisp, straight edges. Your bottom and your top edges would be also nice and crisp if you were using, say, the unit stitch or the regular flat knit stitch, or even the true knit stitch. But because of the E-wrap, they're not so quite crisp here because the E-wrap, you know, creates a twisted knit stitch. So, as you know from watching the first part of the video, we had 1, 2, 3 bobbins. So this is what the back looks like with just those 3 bobbins. So this can kind of give you an idea, just with that little bit of color, we have all of these tails. That is a huge con. A huge con. So all of those have to be woven in. But you can see on the back, you still have this nice little crisp area where the color changes are. And it looks neat on the back. And it looks neat on the front also. So that is what Intarsia knitting looks like. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of our color work series, Intarsia and Fair Isle knitting on the loom. Until next time, happy loom knitting. Bye.